May 24th, 2000, South Jamaica, Queens. A young man named Curtis Jackson sits in the back of a car outside his grandmother's house. An assassin walks up and pours 9 bullets into him. One goes through his jaw, another shatters his hand. He is 24 years old. By every measure that matters, his life is over. His record label drops him within a week. His friends stop returning his calls. He has no money. He cannot return to the streets. So how was he, 18 months later, the most famous rapper in the world? The answer turns out to be far stranger than talent, stranger than luck, stranger than the comeback story you've already imagined. Because what Curtis Jackson did in those 18 months, alone, broke in a bed at his grandmother's house with bullet fragments lodged in his tongue, was not the move of a more determined man. It was the move of a man who had stopped being afraid. And it turns out that move has a history. It's been made before, by a Roman philosopher named Seneca, calmly slicing his own veins on the order of an emperor; by Frederick Douglass, a slave teaching himself to read in defiance of the law; by a 16-year-old peasant girl named Joan of Arc, walking into a French military garrison with a vision so precise the soldiers could not dismiss her. What did they all share? In 2009, the writer Robert Greene sat down with the rapper 50 Cent to answer exactly that question. Together they wrote the 50th Law, and the idea at the center of it is this: fear is the most powerful force in your life, not because of what it makes you do, but because of what it stops you from doing. Your fears are a kind of prison. The smaller the prison, the smaller your life. Over the next hour or so, I'm going to walk you through 10 different ways that prison can be dismantled. Each one is a real shift Curtis Jackson made to go from an orphan kid in Southside Queens to a man whose business empire would outlast his music career. And each one matches something that fearless people have done across history: generals, philosophers, artists, dictators, and saints. You don't need to grow up in a war zone to use any of it. You just need to be willing to see your own life clearly. And that, as you're about to learn, is harder than it sounds. We start where Curtis Jackson started, on the streets, at 11 years old, learning a lesson that would save his life over and over again. Chapter 1. Intense Realism. What would change in your life if you stopped wishing things were different and started seeing them exactly as they are? Picture a kid, 11 years old, in the late 1980s, in a neighborhood called South Jamaica, Queens. His name is Curtis Jackson. He has no father he ever knew. His mother was murdered when he was 8 years old. He lives with his grandparents in a house already crowded with cousins. And what he wants, more than anything, is power, money, and freedom. He looks around at the men in his neighborhood who seem to have those things, and he sees one path: the hustlers, the drug dealers. They have the cars, the clothes, the kind of swagger you don't get working a register. So at 11 years old, Curtis makes a decision. He is going to become one of them. But the further he gets into it, the harsher reality becomes. The drug fiends are unpredictable. Rival hustlers will stab you in the back over a single corner. The big-time dealers will crush you if you do too well. And the police are everywhere. One wrong move and you're in a cell for years. Curtis is overwhelmed. The world doesn't match his ambition, and it never will. How can anyone succeed in chaos like this? One day he's standing on a corner with an older hustler, a man named Truth, and he says something like that out loud. Complains about how impossible the streets are, and Truth turns to him and says something Curtis would never forget. "Don't complain about it," Truth tells him. "The hard life of these streets is a blessing, because here you have to focus. You have to read every person who walks past you. You have to look at yourself, see your own limitations, see your own stupid mistakes. All of that sharpens your eye to a razor's edge. That's your power." And then Truth tells him the most important part. "The greatest danger you face on these streets," he says, "is not the cops. It's not some rival. It's your own mind going soft. I've seen it happen to better hustlers than you. They start doing well, and they think it'll last forever. Or they start doing badly, and they start fantasizing about easy money. Either way, they lose their grip on reality. And on these streets, the moment you lose your grip on reality, you might as well kill yourself. Curtis is a kid, but he hears this and something locks in. He decides he's going to live by a code. Trust no one, conceal his intentions, even from friends, and no matter how high or low his fortunes go, keep the hustler's eye sharp. Here's where the story turns. At 16, Curtis gets caught in a police sting, a moment's inattention. He's sentenced to 9 months in a rehab program upstate. And up there, with nothing to do but think, truth's words come back. He fixes that eye on himself, and he sees something he's been refusing to look at. He sees that he is good at hustling. He really is. But he also sees that the lifespan of a hustler is short. By 20, you're tired. By 25, you're either in prison or dead. The money looks good in the moment, but there's a ceiling, and beneath the ceiling, time is running out. He has ambition this corner cannot hold, and that's when he decides, quietly, in a rehab center, at 16 years old, that he's going to walk away from the streets and break into the music business. No plan B. He'll find someone to teach him. He'll learn everything, and it's either going to work or he's going under. What saved him in that moment was not optimism. It was the opposite of optimism. It was a willingness to look at his own life with the same hard eye he'd been using to read drug fiends and rival hustlers, to see the timer running out, to see the ceiling, to see that the life he loved was a trap. This is what intense realism actually means, not pessimism. Pessimism is just another flavor of fear. Realism is the willingness to absorb things as they are, even when what they are is uncomfortable, even when it means admitting you've been wrong about your own life. And here's the strange thing. Once Curtis got out and got his record deal, and the money started coming in, the eye almost died, because now everyone was being nice to him. The flattery, the sycophants, the press treating him like he could do no wrong. He could feel it dulling his vision, so he had to fight, harder than he had on the streets, to keep that eye open in a world designed to soften it. Think about that for a moment. Think about how much harder it is to see clearly when life is going well. Throughout history, the people who held power longest were the ones who refused to let comfort blur their eyes. Napoleon Bonaparte is considered by many to be the greatest general who ever lived, and what set him apart was not strategy in the abstract. It was the sheer mass of detail he insisted on absorbing himself. He didn't trust filtered reports from his lieutenants. He talked to soldiers up and down the chain of command. He read the terrain with his own eyes. While other generals were getting information third-hand, Napoleon had what we might call a fingertip feel for the whole battlefield. That feel was his weapon. Malcolm X had a different version of the same skill. After he came out of prison, he spent the rest of his short life trying to figure out one question. What is the actual source of the problem for Black Americans? Not the surface, the source. He dug past the easy answers, past what the politicians said, past what the activists said, and eventually he landed on something he believed was the real root: dependency. Dependence on government, on liberals, on leaders, on anyone but themselves. He may or may not have been right, but the method was the same as Napoleon's. Dig until you reach something underneath. The instinct most of us have is the opposite. We react to surfaces. Someone offends us, we get emotional. A problem arises, we patch it. A friend acts strangely, we explain it away. The realist asks the harder question: why did this actually happen? Who actually benefits? What's underneath? And here's the part that surprised me about this principle. We tend to think of realists as cynical, cold, the kind of people who can't dream and can't imagine. But the actual argument is the exact opposite, and I think it's right. The dreamers, the ones who can't see reality, are the people who start the worst wars. They miss the early signs. They wave away the warnings. They believe their own press releases. It's the realists, the ones willing to see what's actually there, who become the real inventors, the empirical scientists, the writers who actually understand human nature, the leaders who guide a country through a crisis without falling for the fantasy that the crisis isn't real. Realism is not the opposite of imagination. It is what imagination becomes when it grows up. So the first move, the foundation of everything that follows, is this. You become willing to see your life as it is, the timer that is actually running, the ceiling you have actually hit, the people around you who actually mean you harm, no matter how friendly their words, the patterns in your own behavior that have actually been hurting you for years. Not to despair about any of it, to work with it, because you cannot move a piece on a board you refuse to look at. But seeing clearly is only the first move. Once you see the truth about your life, the question becomes, who's actually been running it? Who has been making your decisions? And what would it cost you to stop letting them? Truth taught Curtis to see. The next lesson he learned was even harder, and he learned it sitting at a table, bagging crack for someone else. Chapter 2. Self-Reliance. Curtis is 17 years old. He's just finished his 9 months in the upstate rehab center, and he's back on the streets of Queens with nothing. The money he'd saved is gone. His customers have all moved on to other dealers. He needs to make money fast. A friend approaches him. This guy now runs a big crack operation in the neighborhood, and he offers Curtis a job. Come work for me. I'll pay you a daily wage. You'll be one of my baggers, chopping up rocks, weighing them out, packaging the product. Not bad money, easy work. Maybe down the road I'll cut you in on the bigger action. Curtis needs the money, so he says yes. The first day, he sits down at a table. There are other baggers around him, all former dealers like him. And within an hour, Curtis realizes what has happened. He has lost more than his money. He has lost his time. He has to show up when he is told. He has to bow to a boss. He has to ask permission. He is no longer running anything. He is hired help. He looks at the other baggers around him, men who used to run their own corners. They have all been beaten down by something, a stretch in prison, a violent encounter, a loss they didn't recover from. Now they want the safety of a paycheck. Now they are scared, and in that moment, Curtis sees their entire future. They will do this work for a few years, maybe a few more. They will forget how to fend for themselves, and someday the work will dry up, because work like this always dries up, and they will have no skills left, no instincts, no edge. They will become beggars in one form or another for the rest of their lives. He decides he will not become them, and he decides it on day one. So this is what he does. At the end of the first shift, he takes the cash he's been paid for the day, and he splits it among the other baggers at the table. Why? Because he has noticed something the boss has not. Those other baggers have been skimming. They've been pocketing the little bits of crack that get left behind when you cut up rocks. Each leftover piece on its own is nothing, but together, across a whole table of baggers, it adds up to a real stash. Curtis offers them his cash. In exchange, they give him their skim. He walks home that night, not with a daily wage, but with his own product. By the end of the week, he has enough to start his own operation back up. One day at the table, that's all it took. He turned a trap into a stepping stone because he refused to be a minion for one more shift than he had to. Now here's why this story is so much bigger than what happened in that kitchen. Almost all of us, at some point, take a position where we work for someone else, and almost all of us, at some point, find ourselves doing what those baggers were doing, trading our time for a paycheck, trading our freedom for what feels like safety, trading our potential ownership of something, anything, for the comfort of not having to risk anything. And here is what is tricky about it. It feels reasonable in the moment. Bills are due, health insurance matters, the job's not so bad, the boss is nice enough, there is no urgency. And so the years go by, and one day you wake up and realize you spent 15 years making someone else rich, building someone else's vision, and you have nothing of your own to show for it. What Curtis figured out at 17 in a kitchen full of drugs was a principle that takes most of us much longer to see. The real currency in life is not money, it is ownership, and those two things are not the same. If you have to choose between more money and more responsibility, between a higher salary and the chance to actually run something, you pick the second one every time, because the salary will be gone in a year and the ownership compounds for a lifetime. Consider what a 12-year-old kid named Cornelius Vanderbilt did with this principle. Vanderbilt grew up in early 1800s New York, the son of a small-time boatman who shuttled cargo between Staten Island and Manhattan. His father put him to work as a kid, doing drudge labor on the boats, and Vanderbilt hated it. The work was boring, the hours were brutal. He felt like a slave to his own family, but then he made a decision inside his head. And this is the whole story really, just this decision. He decided that in 2 years he was going to start his own shipping business. Just that, just the decision, made silently to himself at 12 years old, and the work transformed. Now this drudge labor was an apprenticeship. Every detail of his father's business, the routes, the costs, the customers, the cargo, became information he absorbed because he was going to use it. The job didn't change, he did. At 16, he borrowed $100 from his mother. He bought a small boat. He started ferrying passengers between Manhattan and Staten Island. He paid back the loan within a year. By 21, he was on his way to becoming the richest man in America, and the motto he lived by for the rest of his life was this: never be a minion, always be an owner. Vanderbilt had no education, no connections, no advantage. What he had was a single mental move he made at 12, the move that took him from passive to active, from being used by his time to using his time, from minion to owner. Same move Curtis made at 17. Now here is where this principle gets uncomfortable, because if you take it seriously, it changes how you think about your career, about your relationships, about every situation where you've been trading away ownership for the appearance of safety. There are a few practical steps. They are not complicated. They are just hard. First, reclaiming dead time. Most of us, when we work for someone else, treat the time as something to be endured. We're waiting for 5 o'clock. We're waiting for Friday. We're waiting for retirement. That time is dead to us. We give it away. The move is to treat every hour of it as your own apprenticeship, soaking up information, learning the business from every angle, watching how power actually flows inside the organization. Your bosses, by the way, would prefer you not do this. They prefer you remain dependent. So the move has to be a little subversive. You learn what they'd rather you not learn. Second, creating little empires. While you're still working for someone else, you carve out small areas of ownership. You volunteer for the project nobody wants. You propose an initiative that's your own idea. You take responsibility for something that wasn't given to you, not because you want to impress anyone, because you want to know what it feels like to actually own a piece of something and to fail or succeed on your own terms. Third, and this is the hard one, you move higher up the food chain. Step by step, you eliminate the people who control your fate, not by being aggressive, just by becoming less dependent on each layer above you, until eventually no one above you can decide whether you eat. And finally, when you do build something of your own, you make it a reflection of who you actually are, not what other people in your field have done, not the model that's already been proven, your own thing with your own stamp on it, in your own voice. Because what you really own, the only thing you can ever fully own, is what could not have come from anyone else. There's a beautiful idea buried inside this principle. Most people think self-reliant people are difficult, prickly, hard to be around. We tend to celebrate the smooth talkers, the people who fit in, the ones who go along to get along. We assume they're happier, but the reverse is closer to the truth. And I think you've probably felt this in your own life. The people who are most comfortable being alone, who don't need anything from us, are paradoxically the most magnetic. We want to be around them. We hope some of their independence rubs off. Meanwhile, the people who are clingy, the people who constantly need validation, we want to get away from them. Their need pushes us away. Self-reliance is not loneliness. It is the only foundation that makes real connection possible. Curtis Jackson, sitting at that bagging table at 17, did not articulate any of this. He just felt it, and he refused to let one more day of his life belong to someone else. But here's the cruel test of any principle. What happens when you've done everything right and the world hits back anyway? When the streets are behind you, the music deal is signed, the future looks bright, and then someone walks up to your car in broad daylight with a gun. To find out what he did next, we have to go back to that car, to May of 2000, to the moment from the very beginning of this story. Chapter 3, Opportunism. Curtis Jackson, now performing under the name 50 Cent, has spent the past year working on what is supposed to be his debut album. It's called Power of the Dollar. Columbia Records is going to release it in a few weeks. To him, this album represents every lesson he's learned on the streets. It's the proof that the move he made at 16 was the right one. The proof that he didn't waste the time. And on May 24th, 2000, he is sitting in the back of a car outside his grandmother's house in Queens, when a man walks up and pours 9 bullets into him. He survives, barely. One bullet has gone through his jaw, lodging fragments in his tongue. Another has shattered his hand. His face is half destroyed. He spends the next weeks in a hospital bed, then at his grandmother's, recovering. And then the second wave hits. Columbia Records calls off the album release. They drop him from the label. He calls around to other labels. Nobody will touch him. He is being blackballed. The violence around him is too risky for the business. One executive flatly tells him he'll have to wait at least 2 years before he can even think about resurrecting his career. And the killers, the ones who put 9 bullets in him in broad daylight, are still out there. They botched the job. They will be back to finish it. So Curtis has to stay low. He cannot return to hustling. He has no money. His friends, the ones who had hoped to ride his coattails to fame, start avoiding him. Think about where he is. 24 years old, the body half destroyed, the career over before it began, the friends gone, the money gone, the future, by any rational accounting, closed. What does he do? He lies in bed at his grandmother's house, and he listens to the radio. For weeks, just listening. And here's what he hears. He hears the rap music that's at the top of the charts. The stuff that's calling itself gangster rap. The stuff that's getting all the attention. And he realizes something. It's fake. All of it. The lyrics describe a world he knows in his bones. And they describe it wrong. They're sanitized. They're packaged. They sound like they were written in a studio by people who have never been near a corner. And then a strange feeling starts taking shape in his mind. The shooting was not a tragedy. The shooting was an opportunity. It was the universe handing him a gift, because look at his position now. He has 9 bullet wounds to prove he is not fake. He has no label telling him what to do. He has no executives softening his sound. He has nothing to lose, and he has a voice that, because of the fragments in his tongue, will never sound the same again. A voice that hisses, that has to move more slowly, that sounds menacing without trying. Every single one of those things, the wounds, the blackballing, the broken voice, should be a disadvantage. He decides every single one of them is now a weapon, so he goes underground for months. He stays at various friends' houses. He records constantly. He stops trying to fix his voice and instead leans into it. The slow, deliberate delivery, the hiss that reminds you he survived a bullet to the jaw. He builds an entire persona around the man who could not be killed. And then in the summer of 2001, just as people are starting to forget about him, he drops his first song to the streets. The title is a message to his would-be assassins. He's not hiding from them. He's not pretending the shooting didn't happen. He's broadcasting it, daring them to come back and finish. And he doesn't release the music through any label. He releases it as mixtapes. He sells them on the corner. He gives them away for free. He floods the streets of New York with track after track, at a pace no signed artist could match. Within a year, every kid in New York knows his name. By 2003, Eminem and Dr. Dre have signed him. 6 months after that, his debut record sells more copies in its first week than any rap album in history. The shooting was the worst thing that could have happened to him. The shooting was the best thing that could have happened to him. They were the same thing. This is what opportunism actually means, and the word in English has gotten a bad reputation. We use it to describe someone who'll do anything for themselves, who has no values, who's a kind of slimy operator. But the original meaning was something else. Older, stoic. The Romans had a phrase for it. Amor fati, love of fate. The idea is this: every event that happens to you, every loss, every accident, every betrayal, every illness, is fated to occur. You cannot change that it happened. What you can change is what you do with it. The person who keeps wishing it had been different, who keeps complaining about how unfair it is, that person stays stuck. The person who accepts that it was always going to happen and asks what advantage can be drawn from it becomes free. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, described this state of mind as a fire that consumes everything that falls into it and uses it for heat. Logs, paper, kindling, debris, it doesn't matter. The fire doesn't ask whether the fuel is appropriate. It just burns. And someone who has this mind, he said, cannot be hurt by anything or anyone, because everything that comes at them becomes fuel. Now, this is a beautiful philosophy, but how do you actually do it? How do you become the kind of person who turns a shooting into a comeback? There's a story from the early 1700s that lays it out cleanly. It involves a Scottish sailor named Alexander Selkirk. In 1704, after a fight with his captain, Selkirk is marooned on a deserted island about 400 miles off the coast of Chile. All they leave him with is a rifle, some gunpowder, a knife, and some carpenter's tools. The island is barren, no people, just goats, cats, rats, and some strange animals that scream in the night. For the first weeks, Selkirk does what most of us would do. He stays on the shoreline. He looks out at the ocean, hoping for a passing ship. He sleeps in a cave. He catches fish. He gives into a deep, slow depression. He counts up everything he doesn't have. Not enough food, not enough materials. The gunpowder will run out. The knife will rust. His clothes will rot off his back. If only, he keeps thinking, if only he had brought more from the ship. And then one day, the sea lions arrive. It's their mating season. They flood the shoreline. He can't stay there anymore. They drive him inland. Inland is a dark forest, and the moment he is forced into it, something changes. He starts looking around, and he realizes the forest has been there the entire time, and he has been ignoring it. The wood for shelter, the fruit trees for food, the goats he can hunt, the feral cats he can tame for protection from the rats and for company. He takes apart his rifle and fashions it into tools. He remembers that his father was a shoemaker, and he makes himself clothes out of animal hides. By the time a ship finally rescues him years later, Selkirk would say something strange. He would say those years on that island were the happiest of his life. What changed? Not the island. The island was the same. What changed was that he stopped wishing for the resources he didn't have and started using the ones he did. This is the move, and it sounds simple when you say it out loud, but notice how rare it is. Most people, when they hit a setback, spend years on the shoreline. They look out at the ocean. They count what they're missing. They tell themselves, if only I had more money, if only I had more time, if only I had better contacts, if only my voice still worked, If only the label hadn't dropped me. If only. The opportunist asks the opposite question. What is already here? What did the setback hand me that I didn't have before? When 50 Cent was shot, what was handed to him was this: a voice nobody else had, a story nobody could fake, a freedom from any executive who might have softened him, a reason for the world to pay attention, a grandmother's house to lie low in while he worked, and all the time in the world to think. He used every piece of it. Every single piece. There's one more point about timing that's worth pausing on. Most of us, when we have a big idea or a big opportunity, wait too long to move on it. We tell ourselves we need more money, more skill, more confidence, more allies. We mistake our hesitation for prudence. The opportunist moves before they are ready. In 49 BC, Julius Caesar stood at a small river called the Rubicon, on the border between Gaul and Italy. To cross it with his army was to start a civil war against Pompey. He had a small force, far smaller than he should have had to take on Rome. His lieutenants told him to wait, build up, gather more troops. Caesar instead crossed with what he had, surprised the enemy, and never looked back. Centuries later, Napoleon said something about this kind of moment that's worth memorizing. The moral, he said, is to the physical as 3 to 1, meaning the energy and motivation you bring to a fight count 3 times as much as your physical resources. With enough hunger, with enough urgency, a person can compensate for almost any disadvantage. 50 Cent, in a bed at his grandmother's, was outnumbered, outfunded, and outgunned by every label in the industry. What he had was a level of hunger nobody else had, and it tipped the scales. Here's the dark truth underneath this whole principle. Most of us secretly enjoy our setbacks. Not the pain of them, the pain is real, but the excuse, the story we get to tell about why we never moved forward, the shooting that happened to us, the job that fell through, the relationship that ended, the thing that wasn't fair. The opportunist takes the excuse away from themselves. They look at the disaster and ask, what is the gift inside this? Because there is always a gift. There is always a thing the setback handed you that you couldn't have gotten any other way. Find the gift, take it, use it, because the setback is going to be there whether you use it or not. You might as well make it work. But here's the danger in winning the way Curtis won. Once you find a system that works, once you've turned a disaster into an empire, the temptation is to hold on to it, to freeze it, to make it permanent. And that's the move that destroys almost everyone who gets to the top. Curtis learned this lesson early. He learned it from a man in a red Ferrari who didn't live to see 30. Chapter 4. Calculated momentum. Picture Southside Queens in the late 1980s. Crack cocaine has just hit the streets, and everything has changed. The old gang structures are broken. Anyone with a little capital can start hustling on a corner. There are no rules. Every man for himself. Hundreds of scheming rivals, erratic addicts, old gang leaders trying to muscle their way back in, and police swarming the area. It's like the Wild West. Some hustlers hate this. They want structure. They want a boss to tell them when to show up. They don't last long. Others thrive on the anarchy. Curtis is the second kind. He's hustling in the chaos, making his own rules, learning to read the disorder. And then one day, everything changes. An older drug lord, they call him the Godfather, makes a play for the entire neighborhood. He installs his son Jermaine as the new boss of Curtis's block. Jermaine doesn't believe in chaos. He believes in monopoly. He shows up with a plan. Everyone in the neighborhood will now sell the same product. Purple Top capsules at a fixed cheap price. One size fits all. Anyone who tries to compete will be intimidated, beaten, or worse. The neighborhood will be a single, tightly controlled corporation, and Jermaine will be its CEO. Curtis tries to defy him at first, sells his own stuff on the side, gets caught, gets beaten, decides for the moment to surrender. But Jermaine likes Curtis's spirit. He sees something of himself in this stubborn kid, so he takes Curtis under his wing and explains his theory. He has read business books in prison. He has studied economics. He has modeled his operation on the most successful corporations in America. Monopoly through cheap prices, just like the big tech companies of his era. The whole crack trade in Southside Queens is going to look like a Fortune 500 company. And to prove it to Curtis, one day Jermaine pulls up in his red Ferrari and invites Curtis along for a ride. He drives to a nearby housing project. This area is controlled by a gang called the Pharaohs, heavily invested in the crack trade, notorious for their violence. Curtis watches from the passenger seat as Jermaine walks in and explains his plan to the Pharaohs' leaders. They will have to fall in line. They can't be operating on the margins of his empire. He'll make it profitable for them, but they will become part of the system. Curtis sits in that Ferrari and feels his stomach drop. He is only a kid, but he can see what's coming. A week later, Jermaine is shot in the head, dead in a back alley. Everyone in the neighborhood knows who did it. Everyone knows why. In the months that follow, Curtis thinks long and hard about what happened. A part of him had identified with Jermaine. He too had ambition. He too wanted to build something. He too could see the appeal of imposing order on chaos. But Jermaine's whole approach had been wrong. Even if Jermaine had lived another year, even 10, the system would have collapsed. Too many people on the fringes resented him. The customers got tired of one size fits all. They wanted variety, even if it was just the color of the capsule. The police would have eventually noticed the size of the operation and broken it up. Jermaine was running a business model from the past, in a world that had already moved on, and the lesson Curtis took from it was this: don't build a fortress, build a flow. After Jermaine's death, Curtis changed his entire approach. He stopped trying to dominate one corner. He started running 4 or 5 hustles at once. If the police hit one, the others kept moving. He never tied himself to a single venture, a single partner, or a single way of doing things. He stayed light, he stayed fluid, and the chaos that had killed Jermaine became Curtis' home. Years later, when Curtis is working with a major record label and meeting with corporate executives, he sees the same Jermaine pattern everywhere. The record industry is being destroyed by piracy, and the executives just want to maintain their old monopolies on distribution. They cannot adapt. They never talk to their customer base. They never evolve. They are living in the past, when business models were simple and control was easy. 50 does the opposite. He branches into vitamin water. He starts a publishing company. He partners with car companies. None of it makes traditional sense for a rapper. None of it has to. He is running multiple angles at once, the way he ran multiple corners. If one venture fails, he learns and moves to the next. His old hustler instincts, the ones that kept him alive on the streets, turn out to be exactly the skills he needs in a chaotic corporate world. Stay loose, stay moving, never become Jermaine. This kind of fluidity is not just about business strategy. It's a way of being, and the people throughout history who held onto their power longest were the ones who learned to flow with change, not against it. Consider Leonardo da Vinci. We remember him as a painter, but that's the wrong picture of him. He started in painting. The study of painting led him to design in general. Design led him to architecture. Architecture led him to engineering. Engineering led him to building war machines, then to studying military strategy. He observed animals to understand motion, which led him to study birds and aerodynamics. He dissected human bodies to understand anatomy, which led him to study how emotions affect physiology. He recognized no boundaries between disciplines. His mind was a single, unbroken flow. His contemporaries thought he was eccentric. Some thought he couldn't focus. But the patrons who really understood, including a French king and the warlord César Borgia himself, knew what he was. He was the first true Renaissance mind. Not because he knew a lot of things, because nothing inside his head was walled off from anything else. Now compare that to how most of us are taught to live. From the moment we enter school, we're told to specialize. Pick a track, pick a major, pick a career, pick a niche. Become the person who knows one thing deeply, and there is power in that. But there is also a kind of strangulation, because life, the actual life that hits you each day, doesn't respect the categories. Life is mixed. It demands fluidity. There are 4 kinds of flow worth holding in your mind. Mental flow, that's the Da Vinci move. Let your curiosity cross between disciplines. Read outside your field. Bring ideas from one part of your life into another part where they don't obviously belong. Emotional flow, and this one is harder. Don't hold on to your emotions. When something upsets you, let it pass through you. The word for this is forgetting. Forgetting is a skill. Most of us hold our anger, our disappointment, our resentments for days or years longer than they are useful to us. The fluid person feels the emotion fully and then lets it go. Social flow. When you lead a group, don't try to control everyone. The Swedish filmmaker Ingmar Bergman used to direct his actors with tight control like a dictator. His films were good. Then he tried something different. He started sketching the script loosely, leaving the dialogue open, inviting his actors to bring their own experiences into the scenes. He let the film be shaped by everyone in it. His films became masterpieces. Letting go of the need to control everything turned out to be the source of his greatest power and cultural flow. Read the times you live in. Don't get attached to the version of the world you grew up in. Charlie Parker invented bebop in the 1940s and changed jazz forever. Then he watched bebop become the new convention, and younger musicians moved past him. He couldn't accept it. He spiraled. He died young. Miles Davis, who had played alongside Parker, watched what happened and decided he would reinvent himself every few years. Every album he made was different from the one before. He stayed alive musically into his 60s, while Parker burned out at 34. The lesson is hard. The things that make you successful in one season can be the very things that destroy you in the next. The hustler who can't leave the streets, the executive who can't leave the old business model, the artist who can't move past their first hit. Everyone eventually has a germane moment, a moment where the rigid structure they built is about to kill them and they refuse to see it. What separates the people who survive that moment from the ones who don't? The willingness to leave behind the thing that worked, to kill the version of yourself that succeeded, to stay in motion when motion is uncomfortable, to let the chaos of the world flow through you instead of bracing against it. Be water, not stone. Stone breaks. Water finds the way around. But fluidity isn't softness. The flow you bring to your life doesn't mean you become a pushover. There are moments, and they come more often than we'd like to admit, when the situation calls for the opposite, when fluidity won't save you, when the only move is the lion's. Curtis was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The neighborhood that had taught him to move with chaos had now become the chaos itself, and the only way through was the opposite of flow. Chapter 5. Aggression and Authority. What do you do when the rules of the game have been set up specifically to keep you from winning? Curtis is about 17. He has just gotten out of his 9 months upstate, and he comes home to find that the streets of Southside Queens have changed. While he was gone, the older hustlers in the neighborhood have made a kind of peace treaty. The rivalries have died down. Everyone has their own corner. Customers come to them. It's predictable. It's safe. It's profitable enough to live on, and nothing more. Curtis tries to rejoin the game on his old terms. He puts the word out. He's looking to get his old crew back together, expand his territory, do what he used to do. And the response from the other hustlers is not warm. It is openly hostile. He gets the feeling they would rather kill him than let him disrupt their nice, quiet system. Now think about Curtis's problem. He cannot expand within the rules. If he plays by the new arrangement, he stays on one corner forever, making just enough to get by. watching the years slip away. He cannot save enough money to make the music transition he's been planning. He cannot move up. The system has been designed by people who like things exactly as they are, and his ambition makes him the enemy. So how do you compete in a game where the rules are rigged against you? Curtis thinks about this for weeks. And then he remembers something one of the older hustlers in the neighborhood used to do. They called it a setup. It's a variation on the old con of bait and switch. You distract people with something dramatic and emotional, and while they're not paying attention, you take what you want. In the rehab program upstate, Curtis had befriended the ringleader of a gang of stick-up artists from Brooklyn. These guys are notorious. They rob hustlers, they walk into corners with guns and take everything. They are exactly the kind of menace that the new peaceful arrangement in Southside Queens was designed to avoid. So here is what Curtis does. He keeps a low profile for a few weeks. He works a single corner like everyone else. He appears to have accepted the new system, and meanwhile he secretly contacts his friend in Brooklyn. He hires the entire stick-up crew to come into his neighborhood and rob every single hustler, including, importantly, Curtis himself. They'll keep the cash and the jewelry from the robberies. Curtis will get the drugs. What happens next is exactly what Curtis predicted. The Brooklyn stick-up artists hit the neighborhood. They hit it again. They hit it a third time. The hustlers are panicked. Curtis pretends to share their distress. He's been robbed too, after all. But beneath the surface, the whole quiet system is collapsing. The hustlers now have to carry guns for protection. But to be caught loitering on a corner with a gun means hard prison time, and the police have been called into the area because of the violence. Suddenly, the dealers can't just stand on their corners and wait for customers. They have to keep moving. They have to take phone calls. They have to do business on the run. The whole easy, predictable system is dead within a few weeks, and Curtis moves into the chaos with a new product line and a stash of free drugs from his own staged robberies. He has all the supply the other dealers don't have. He has the energy the other dealers don't have. The customers flock to him. By the time the other hustlers figure out what happened, and they do figure it out eventually, it's too late. Curtis is already on his way out of the game, with the money saved up to make his music transition. Now, this is a brutal story, and I'm not pretending it's anything else. The point is not that what Curtis did was admirable. The point is what it reveals about a different way of seeing competition. Most of us, when we're losing inside a system, do one of two things. We either give up and accept our losing position, or we complain that the system isn't fair. We try to get the rules changed. We argue, we protest. What we almost never do is the third thing. We almost never look at the system itself as an obstacle to be removed. The word for this is aggression, and it doesn't mean violence. Curtis did not hurt a single person directly in that whole setup. What it means is the willingness to play a different game than the people around you are playing, to refuse, in your own private mind, the legitimacy of rules that were designed to keep you small. Most of the rules around your life are not laws of nature. They are conventions. Someone set them up at a particular moment for a particular reason that may no longer apply, and you have been treating them as if they were physics. The aggressive move is to see them for what they are, conventions set by someone, breakable, and to find a way around or through. But here is the harder question this principle raises. Once you've done something like what Curtis did, once you've disrupted the system that other people were comfortable inside, how do they see you afterward? Because here's the truth. They don't only see you as a threat, they also see you, quietly, as a king. Picture an earlier moment in Curtis's life, when he was about 13. He had built up a small but successful operation in the neighborhood, and an older hustler named Wayne, fresh out of prison, determined to dominate, decided Curtis was his main rival. Wayne tried to intimidate Curtis. Curtis ignored him, so Wayne escalated. He put the word out on the street that he was going to have Curtis killed. Curtis had seen this kind of thing before. He knew exactly what Wayne was doing. Wayne wouldn't do the job himself. He couldn't risk going back to prison. He was hoping some young kid in the neighborhood would hear about the bounty and take the initiative on his own, eager to gain a reputation. Sure enough, within days, Curtis noticed a kid named Nitty trailing him on the streets, watching, waiting. Curtis is 13 years old. There is a man twice his age trying to manipulate a different teenager into killing him, and he has to figure out on his own, with no help, how to survive this. He sees the flaw in Wayne's plan. Wayne is too scared to do the killing himself. That is his weakness. So Curtis doesn't go after Wayne. Wayne would have the perfect excuse to kill him in self-defense. He doesn't go after Nitty directly to kill him either. That would land Curtis in prison and give Wayne the perfect outcome. Instead, Curtis grabs a friend named Tony. The two of them ambush Nitty on the street in the middle of the day. Tony holds him. Curtis takes out a razor blade and slashes Nitty's face, deep enough to leave a serious scar, shallow enough that the kid runs to the hospital instead of the morgue. Then a few hours later, Curtis and Tony find Wayne's empty car and shoot it up. An ambiguous message. Either we wish you'd been inside, or we're daring you to come out and fight. What happens next is the whole point of the story. Nitty goes straight to Wayne, expecting them to team up for revenge. After all, Wayne has been attacked too. His car is full of bullet holes. But Wayne still won't pull the trigger himself. He still wants Nitty to do it alone. And in that moment, Nitty sees through everything. He sees that he was being used as a patsy. He sees that Wayne is not as tough as he had pretended. Nitty walks away from the whole thing. He can live with the scar. Now Wayne is in an impossible position. If he tries to hire someone else, the same thing will happen. They'll see the truth. If he does it himself, he gets sent back to prison. So he does nothing. He lets it go. He loses, and the neighborhood watches the whole thing. They see Wayne exposed. They see a 13-year-old kid outmaneuver an older man twice his size. They see Curtis do something violent, yes, but they see him do it on his own terms, with his own hands, with a plan, and that turns out to mean something. After that day, Curtis stopped having to fight constantly. Other hustlers thought twice before challenging him. Younger kids in the neighborhood started looking up to him, gathering around him. The respect he had earned through one strange afternoon with a razor blade became a kind of force field that protected him for years. This is what authority actually means, and there's a point about it worth holding onto. The word authority comes from the Latin word for author. An author is someone who creates something new. The Romans had a very specific idea about this. If you simply held a position, a title, a rank, and acted as if your position entitled you to certain powers, you actually lost your authority. You stopped being an author. You became a passive consumer of power. The only way to keep authority was to keep creating, keep acting, keep producing results that other people could see. Think about how this applies to your own life. Think about the leaders you've worked under who tried to lead from their title alone, and how quickly you stopped respecting them. And then think about the leaders who led from the front, who made hard decisions in public, who took risks first, and asked others to follow. Napoleon had a phrase for the way he ran his army. He called it the mission statement. He would give his field marshals a clear sense of what the battle was supposed to accomplish, and then he let them figure out how. They were trusted to execute on their own. He didn't hover. He didn't micromanage. He gave the vision and trusted the people closest to the action. The result was that his army moved 3 times faster than anyone else's, and his marshals became the most capable officers in Europe. When you lead from the front, when you actually do the hard things in public, when you take the first risk and make the first hard call, people stop needing reasons to follow you. They follow because the evidence is right in front of them, because you've already shown that you'll do what you're asking them to do. You don't claim authority, you earn it by being an author of something real over and over again. But authority by itself, the kind of power that comes from boldness and force, has a ceiling. It impresses people. It scares people. It does not by itself make anything that lasts. To build something that lasts, you need a much harder skill. The hardest skill, really. You need patience. Chapter 6. Connection and Mastery. Picture a young man arriving in Paris in 1882. His name is Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec. He comes from one of the oldest aristocratic families in France. He has every advantage of birth, wealth, education, the kind of access that opens any door. But he is also a man with a secret kind of pain. His legs stopped growing when he was 14. The result of a genetic condition. He is short. He walks awkwardly. He has been treated as an outsider by his own family his whole life. He feels nothing in common with the people he was born to. He moves to a part of Paris called Montmartre. At the time, Montmartre is the seedy district, the part of the city respectable people don't go. It's filled with cafes and dance halls. The people who live there are prostitutes, criminals, street performers, anarchists, dancers, con artists, the people that the rest of Paris doesn't want to see. And Henry walks in, an aristocrat's son, with his sketchpad, and he does something the other artists of his time would never have done. He doesn't observe Montmartre. He moves into it. He befriends the prostitutes and hires them as models. He drinks with the criminals and the anarchists. He spends his evenings in the dance halls, sketching while the performances happen. He absorbs the rhythms and gestures and faces of this world until they live inside him. Other famous painters of the era, Degas, Renoir, also painted scenes from Montmartre, but they painted from outside. They painted as visitors, curious tourists peeking through a window. You can feel the distance in their work. Toulouse-Lautrec painted from inside. He was on stage with the dancers. He was at the table with the prostitutes. He was in the room. And when his work started getting noticed, it had a quality nobody had seen before. A feeling of being inside a moment, instead of observing it from the outside. In 1889, the most famous dance hall in Paris, the Moulin Rouge, opened. Toulouse-Lautrec was commissioned to make the posters. The first poster he produced was a scandalous image of a dancer kicking her leg so high you could see her underwear. The colors were intense. The space was flat in a strange new way that made the viewer feel like they were standing on stage with the dancers, in the middle of all the noise and color and motion. When the posters went up around the city, Paris stopped to look. Nothing like it had been seen before. The Moulin Rouge became famous overnight. Toulouse-Lautrec became famous with it. What he had done, what no painter before him had quite managed, was to dissolve the distance between an artist and the world he was depicting. He didn't paint about Montmartre. He painted from inside it. There's a striking argument here. You cannot disguise your real attitude toward the people you're trying to reach. If you feel even slightly superior to your audience, if you see yourself as part of some chosen elite who is condescending to communicate with regular people, it shows up in the work. It seeps out in the tone. It feels patronizing, even when the words are kind. If you genuinely connect with your audience, on the other hand, if you have actually been one of them, or have at least lived among them, listened to them, absorbed their daily frustrations and small joys, what you make resonates without effort. People can feel when you know them from the inside, which brings us back to Curtis Jackson. In the early 2000s, signed to a major record label, surrounded by other rappers who suddenly had money and time. Picture this scene: New York City, a floor at Columbia Records. There are about a dozen new rappers signed to the label. Curtis is one of them. Every night, most of them go out. They party. They show up at clubs. They take the trappings of their new fame as the reward, as the point. The music is something they'll get around to. Curtis does the opposite. He records at night. And then, every single day, he goes into the Columbia Records office. Not to record, to learn. He walks through every department. He talks to the marketing people. He asks how distribution works. He sits with the producers and asks about how a song actually gets made. He studies the business from the inside, the way a kid studies the ledger of his father's shipping company. When the label sends Curtis and about 30 other rappers to a retreat upstate to write songs, here's what happens. Most of the other rappers come back with 5 or 6 tracks. Curtis comes back with 36. He's not more talented than they are. Many of them are more naturally gifted. He's just done what very few people in the music business have ever been willing to do. He's treating his time at Columbia as a university. He's there to learn. The fame and the money are not the point. The mastery is. And here's the payoff. When Columbia drops him after the shooting, when the entire industry locks him out, when he has nothing left, he has actually accumulated something the executives didn't realize they were giving him. He knows how the business works from the inside. He doesn't need them anymore. The mixtape campaign that resurrected his career was possible because he had spent every available hour in the years before the shooting studying marketing, distribution, and song production. The other rappers got the parties. He got the education. And in the moment when everything collapsed, the education was the only thing that survived. There is one quality more than any other that separates the people who become masters of their craft from the people who don't. And it's not talent, it's not intelligence, it's not even discipline, exactly. It's something more humble than that. It's the ability to tolerate boredom. Now, this is a strange word to use as a virtue. We're trained to think of boredom as something to be escaped. We have devices in our pockets specifically designed to make sure we never have to experience it. The moment we feel a little restless, we reach for something, a phone, a snack, a piece of entertainment, anything. But here's the case. The modern relationship to boredom is the single biggest obstacle to mastery in any field. Because mastery requires long stretches of repetition that don't feel like progress. It requires sitting with a difficult problem for hours when your brain is begging you to do something easier. It requires going over the same scales, the same rep, the same chapter, the same exercise, for years, long after you've stopped feeling clever. Most people can't do this. Not because they lack ability, because they can't sit with the boredom long enough for the mastery to take hold. In the hood that Curtis grew up in, the same dynamic plays out at higher stakes. The jobs available are menial. They don't lead anywhere. And so the choice for most people is between 2 kinds of escape. Escape through drugs and partying, or escape through the discipline of building something that doesn't pay off for years. The people who choose the second path have a particular quality. They've already been trained by the boredom of bad jobs or the slow grind of hustling to endure long stretches of nothing. They don't whine. They don't expect quick results. They've learned that the gap between where they are and where they want to be is filled with thousands of repetitions that nobody will applaud. And on the other side of that boredom is the only kind of freedom that lasts. The freedom of actually being good at something. But mastery is only the foundation. There is one more move you need to make before all this becomes something real. You need to believe, without irony, without hedging, without permission, that the life you have imagined for yourself is actually possible. That you, specifically, are the person who is going to do it. And that turns out to be the hardest move of all. Because deep self-belief, the kind that actually changes what's possible, is not the same as confidence. It's something quieter and stranger and rarer. Chapter 7. Self-Belief. To understand where Curtis Jackson's confidence comes from, you have to go back to the worst moment of his childhood. He is 8 years old. His mother, Sabrina, is the only person in his life who has ever truly seen him. She has been hustling on the streets herself. That's how she pays the bills. And she has dreams of pulling her son out of the neighborhood and into a better life. And then one day she doesn't come home. She has been murdered. She is 23 years old. Curtis is left with his grandparents in a crowded house. There is nobody now who is focused on him alone. Nobody whose ambition is specifically about him. Nobody who is going to come back one day and rescue him from this place. What happens next is a small detail, but it is the seed of everything that came after. He starts spending a lot of time alone. And alone in his head, he begins to construct a different life. He sees himself as a leader of some kind. He pictures the places he'll live, the cars he'll drive, the countries he'll travel to. These aren't fantasies he uses to escape. They have a strange specificity to them. He sees them clearly, in detail, the way you might see a memory rather than a wish. And he feels, and he believes, that his mother's energy and ambition are inside him now, that she is somehow watching, that what he is going to build is going to be for both of them. Now hold that image for a moment. A child, alone, constructing in detail a future he has no reason at all to believe in. And then come the years of hustling. The arrest at 16, the decision to break into music, the mixtape grind, the shooting, the label dropping him, the blackballing. In the months after the shooting, Curtis is in a strange position. The mixtape campaign is starting to work. His name is spreading through the streets of New York, but the assassins are still out there. He can't go anywhere alone. He has to move from house to house, and the constant feeling of being hunted is eating at him. He decides he needs a group of people around him. Not bodyguards in the professional sense. He can't afford them. He needs something else. He needs disciples. So he asks his closest friends to convene a meeting at his grandparents' house in Southside, Queens. They are to invite his most loyal fans in the neighborhood, the young men they know to be dependable, and they should all bring guns to help secure the street before Curtis arrives. Now picture this scene. A small house in a working-class neighborhood. 20 young men, most of them under 25, standing around the living room, each one armed. The block outside is being watched, and then Curtis Jackson walks in. Slowly, because his jaw is still healing, his hand still wounded, and he looks at this room full of young men who have come because they believe in him. He starts talking, and what he says is not a pep talk. It is a vision. He paints them, in detail, the future he sees. The music is hot now. It is going to get hotter. Within 2 years, he is certain to land a major record deal. He already knows what the first album is going to be. He can hear the songs in his head. He can see the cover. The album will sell more than any rap record in history because he has figured out a formula. He is not in this for the bling. He is in this for the power. The money from the album sales will be used to start businesses. He is going to build an empire, and he tells them, every one of them in this room, that he wants them to be part of it. He'll hire them. He'll set them up. He'll pay for their college if that's what they want. Anything, as long as they prove dependable. And then he says the line that everyone in that room would remember for the rest of their lives. He says, "You are like my pack of wolves." But none of this will happen if the alpha wolf is killed. What he is asking them for is protection, yes. But what he is really asking them for is faith. Faith that the vision he just described is real. Faith that the broken-jawed kid standing in his grandparents' living room with no record deal and no money is the person he says he is. Almost every man in that room said yes. And over the years that followed, almost every word of what Curtis described in that living room came true. The record deal, the album, the sales, the business empire. They watched it happen, one piece at a time, exactly as he had said. Where did that vision come from? Was Curtis Jackson lucky? Was he gifted? Was he just delusional in a way that happened to work out? None of those, exactly. What he had was a sense of destiny. The feeling, not the hope, not the dream, the feeling that the life he had imagined since he was 8 years old was real, that it was already, in some sense, his. He just had to walk into it. In 1428, in a small French town called Vaucouleurs, soldiers stationed at the garrison started receiving visits from a 16-year-old peasant girl. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc. She came from a poor village nearby, and she told them, calmly and repeatedly, that she had been chosen to rescue France from the English occupation. She was to be given troops. She was to lead them to the city of Orléans. She was to defeat the English there. Then she was to escort the Dauphin to Reims to be crowned king. Plenty of people in France at that time were having visions. The soldiers had heard it all before. They were skeptical, but Joan was different from the others. Despite their dismissals, she kept returning. She walked unescorted among hundreds of restless soldiers and showed no fear. She spoke plainly, like the peasant girl she was, but there was not a shred of doubt in her voice. Her eyes were lit up with conviction. Her explanations of what would happen were so detailed, they seemed to have the weight of something that had already occurred. A few of the soldiers came to believe her, not because of any miracle, because the certainty in her was harder to explain than the vision. They convinced the local governor to escort her to the Dauphin. The Dauphin eventually gave her the troops. The citizens of Orléans, convinced she was the savior, rallied to her side. The English were defeated. The Dauphin was crowned. Joan was eventually captured, tried, and burned at the stake. But the chain of events she had described, sitting in a barracks at 16 years old, came to pass. What did Joan share with Curtis Jackson in that grandparents' living room 600 years later? What did they have that other people with the same skills, the same circumstances, the same opportunities did not? They had this. They had stopped asking themselves whether the life they wanted was permitted to them. They had simply assumed it, and the assumption itself, felt deeply enough, held without hedging, became a force that bent the people around them. Most of us go through life waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting for someone with authority to tell us that the version of ourselves we imagine is allowed, waiting for the conditions to be right, waiting for the credentials, waiting for the moment when we feel ready. The destined person doesn't wait. The destined person doesn't already decided. And from that decision, everything else flows. The hard work feels different. The setbacks feel different. The doubts of other people feel different. Because once you've decided who you are, the world has to catch up. This is not magical thinking. Curtis Jackson still had to do the work. Joan of Arc still had to win the battles. The vision did not replace the labor, but the vision is what made the labor possible. It is what made the long, boring, painful years of preparation feel like steps towards something, instead of years of nothing. And here is the part you may not want to hear. You probably do not have this. Most of us, including me, do not. We have hopes, we have plans, we have ambitions. What we do not have, most of the time, is the kind of unshakable sense of destiny that lets you walk into a room full of armed men and tell them, with no evidence, with no signed deals, with a half-healed jaw, exactly how the rest of your life is going to unfold. But the move toward it begins the same way it began for the 8-year-old Curtis. Alone, quietly, by constructing inside your own head, in detail, in specifics, without permission, the life you would have if no one was holding you back, and then believing it, not hoping, believing. Most of the people who shaped the world were once children sitting alone, imagining a future no one had given them any reason to expect. But there is one final fear, the deepest fear, the one underneath all the others, that you have to confront if any of this is going to hold. Because all the self-belief in the world will collapse the moment you remember the one fact that no one wants to think about. The fact that you are going to die. Chapter 8. Confront your mortality. In the year 65 AD, in a country house outside of Rome, an old man named Lucius Annaeus Seneca was visited by an officer of the imperial guard. The officer brought a message from the emperor, a former student of Seneca's, a man named Nero. The message was simple. Seneca had been implicated in a plot against Nero's life. As was the Roman custom, he was being given the courtesy of dying by his own hand. He had hours. Seneca, by this point in his life, was probably the most famous philosopher in the Roman Empire. He had been a senator. He had been Nero's tutor when Nero was a boy. For the first 5 years of Nero's reign, Seneca had effectively governed Rome, trying to keep the young emperor's worst impulses in check. He was 68 years old. What happened next is what the 50th law builds toward, in one form or another. From the first page, Seneca asked permission to review his will. The officer refused. He turned to the friends gathered around him in the room and said, "Being forbidden to show gratitude for your services, I leave you my one remaining possession and my best, the pattern of my life." And he opened the veins in his arms and ankles. The blood in his old body flowed slowly. He sat in a warm bath to make it flow faster. He drank poison. His death was long. It was painful. It was by every measure brutal. But Seneca remained calm throughout. He spoke to his friends. He composed himself. He maintained, in his last hours, the demeanor of a man going through something he had already prepared for, because he had. For decades, Seneca had spent his life practicing dying. He had been exiled to a remote island in his 30s, sent there on trumped-up charges, expecting to die there alone. On that island, he had done something strange. He had begun to practice his own death in his imagination. Every day, every week, he would picture different scenarios: illness, execution, drowning, betrayal, and he would walk through each one in his head until it lost its power to terrify him. Why? Why would anyone do that? Because Seneca was practicing a philosophy that originated in ancient Greece and was developed by the Romans. We call it Stoicism, and the central insight of Stoicism is the strangest one in all of philosophy. It says, the way to learn how to live is to learn how to die. The idea is this: almost every fear you have in your daily life is a downstream branch of one single fear. The fear of death, the fear of looking foolish in front of a group, is a small social version of it. The fear of losing your job is a slow-motion version of it. The fear of being alone, the fear of failure, the fear of change, the fear of speaking up, almost all of these, when you trace them back, end at the same place. They end at the deep, unspoken, mostly unconscious dread that one day you will not exist. So the Stoics did the strangest thing imaginable. They walked toward it. They taught themselves to think about death calmly, regularly, in detail, until the fear lost its teeth. And what they discovered was that once you stopped fearing death, almost all the other fears collapsed with it. The small fears, the social fears, the career fears, the relationship fears, they had all been branches of the same trunk. Cut the trunk, and they all fell. This is what Seneca was doing in that bath. He was demonstrating, in his last hour, the result of 40 years of practice. He was showing his friends, and showing himself, that death, when you have looked at it directly for long enough, becomes just one more thing that happens. Now, why does any of this matter to a person living today who is not facing an emperor's executioner? Because we live in a culture that does the opposite of what the Stoics did. We have removed death from view almost completely. We don't see animals slaughtered for our food. The dying are kept in hospitals, where most of us never visit. Cemeteries are pushed to the edges of cities. We see thousands of deaths in movies and on screens, but those are abstract. They happen to characters, not to us. And because we have banished death from our conscious life, it has not gone away. It has gone underground. It haunts our unconscious. It powers anxieties we can't quite name. It makes us cling to things we don't need. It makes us afraid of risks that would actually make our lives better. There's a young writer, Ernest Hemingway, who stumbled onto a piece of this truth almost by accident. In 1917, at 18 years old, he volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross in Italy. He was sent to the front lines of the First World War. One day, an artillery shell exploded near him. Shrapnel tore through his body. He nearly died. Later, he tried to describe what he had felt in that moment. He said it was as if his soul came right out of his body, like you would pull a silk handkerchief out of a pocket by one corner. And what surprised him about the experience was that it was not horrifying. It was something else. It was strangely exhilarating. He felt in the aftermath more alive than he had ever felt in his life. He chased that feeling for the rest of his life. He went back to wars. He took up bullfighting. He went deep-sea fishing. He hunted big game. He survived plane crashes and car accidents. He kept seeking out moments where his own death came close, because in those moments, he felt the silk handkerchief pull, and he came back more vivid. What Hemingway had discovered, accidentally, was what the Stoics had developed deliberately. The closer you allow death to come, the more alive you feel afterward. The more you flee it, the more deadened you become. You don't have to go to war. You don't have to take physical risks. The same effect can be achieved in smaller doses just by letting yourself contemplate the fact of your own mortality, by picturing your death, by admitting the timer is running, by accepting that nothing you have is permanent. And here is what happens when you do this. You stop clinging. You stop taking petty offenses so seriously. You stop spending your days afraid of small inconveniences. You develop a sense of urgency, the feeling that every moment of your remaining life matters, because there are only so many of them, and you are spending them now whether you mean to or not. You start to live the way you would live if you had 30 good years left, because you do, and those 30 years are not infinite. They are countable. They are running. The Stoics would say something even stronger. They would say that until you have truly faced your mortality, sat with it, accepted it, walked toward it, you have not really started to live yet. You have been existing. You have been postponing. You have been waiting for some perfect future that does not exist and will never come. In a bath in Rome 2,000 years ago, Seneca turned to his friends and gave them what he called the pattern of his life. He had nothing else to give. The pattern was the gift. He had lived in a way that matched his philosophy. He had practiced his death so thoroughly that when it came, he met it without flinching. And the strangest part of his story is that the people who have done this work are not the gloomy ones. They are not the morbid ones. They are the lightest, the ones who laugh easily, the ones who don't take themselves too seriously, the ones who can afford to be generous because nothing they have is so important that they need to clutch it. The fearless person is not the one who has no fear of death. The fearless person is the one who has looked at death so often, so calmly, that it has stopped being able to control them. And once death stops controlling you, almost nothing else can. So we have walked through 10 different ways of dismantling that prison of fear that you carry around with you. Now the question becomes, what do you actually do with any of it tomorrow morning? If you take away nothing else from this hour, take these 3 moves. Number 1, see your own life with the hustler's eye. Truth told the young Curtis that the streets were a blessing because they forced him to see. Most of us never get that gift. We live in environments soft enough that we can avoid looking at the things that scare us, the relationship that has been slowly hurting us, the career we drifted into and have not questioned in a decade, the pattern in our behavior we keep excusing, the friend who has been quietly draining us, the timer that is running while we look the other way. The first move is to give yourself voluntarily what Curtis got from the streets, to look, not at the world out there, at yourself. Pick a quiet evening this week and try this. Ask yourself the question Truth asked Curtis. What is actually happening in my life right now? What have I been pretending not to know? What decision have I been postponing because looking at it would hurt? Not to despair about whatever you find, to finally have something real to work with, because you cannot move a piece on a board you refuse to look at. Number 2, stop waiting for permission. Almost every principle we walked through tonight comes back to this single move. Stop waiting for someone to give you permission for the life you actually want. The 8-year-old Curtis did not ask whether he was allowed to imagine an empire. The 16-year-old Joan of Arc did not ask whether she was allowed to lead armies. The 17-year-old Curtis at the bagging table did not ask whether he was allowed to be an owner instead of a minion. None of them had earned the right. None of them had the credentials. They just decided. And the strange thing, the thing that happens reliably enough that we should stop being surprised by it, is that the world, in its own slow way, starts to bend around the decision. Not because of magic, because once you have decided who you are, the work you do is different. The risks you take are different. The setbacks you survive are different. The people around you can feel that something has shifted, even if they cannot name what. Most of the people who shaped history were once sitting alone, imagining a life that nobody had given them any reason to expect. The move toward your real life begins inside your own head, before anything external changes. Permission is the thing you stop waiting for, and the longer you wait for it, the more of your life you spend inside someone else's idea of what your life should be. Number 3. Practice your death. Seneca, in a hot bath 2,000 years ago, gave his friends what he called the pattern of his life. He had practiced dying for 40 years. He had walked through scenarios of his own death in his imagination so many times that when the actual moment came, he met it like an old conversation. And the strangest part is that the people who do this work are not gloomy. They are the lightest. They laugh easily. They do not take themselves too seriously. They can afford to be generous because nothing they have is so important that they need to clutch it. If you do only one piece of this book, do this. A few minutes each week, not in fear, in something like calm, admitting the obvious, that you are going to die, that you do not know when, that the small fears running your life right now are downstream of the bigger one you have been refusing to face. Look at the bigger one, calmly, repeatedly, and watch the smaller ones get smaller. See clearly, stop asking permission, practice your death. 3 moves, none of them are easy. All of them are available to you tomorrow morning. And if you do them, even imperfectly, even slowly, you will start to feel something Greene and 50 Cent promise in this book, and that I think actually delivers. You will start to feel the walls of the prison getting wider, the room getting bigger, the life getting larger. At the start of this video, I told you about a young man named Curtis Jackson, sitting in the back of a car on May 24th, 2000, the 9 bullets, the label dropping him, the friends vanishing, the future, by every measure that anyone normally uses, closed. By every measure that any reasonable person would use, his life was over. By the only measure that turned out to matter, by what was going on inside his head, in that bed at his grandmother's house, his life was just beginning because he had stopped being afraid. That is the whole book, really. That single shift, the realization that fear is not the natural ground of your life, that it is something layered on top of your life, something that can be looked at and walked through and eventually dismantled. So here is the question to sit with after you close out of this video. What is the fear, the small, civilized, reasonable sounding fear that has been quietly running your life? What decision have you been making year after year because of it? And what would change tomorrow morning if you stopped being afraid of it? Sit with that one. Do not rush past it. If anything in this video landed for you, if you felt a small click of recognition somewhere, I would genuinely recommend reading the full book, The 50th Law by Robert Greene and 50 Cent. There is more there than I could fit into 1 hour, more historical figures, more practical detail, more of the philosophy underneath. I will leave the Amazon and Audible links in the description. If you prefer to listen, the audiobook version is excellent. And if you would like more videos like this one, slow walks through the books that have shaped how people think, consider subscribing. There are many more books on the way. Until next time, be well and be a little less afraid.